Hi there, this is Samantha Abraham, and in today's webinar, as we're looking at building up our emotional resilience, we're going to look at it in 3 stages. First, we're going to look at stress, what our stress responses are, how those happen, and the various different levels of stress, how that impacts our emotional resilience. So we're going to look in more detail exactly what emotional resilience is and how you can then create a plan to develop and maintain it in a way that can benefit you, but also your family too. Really looking forward to it.
Hello, my name is Niamh Daru and I am the CEO of Brilliant Parents. Welcome to our first Lunch and Learn webinar. Brilliant Parents is a charity whose aim is to support parents and carers with what I consider to be one of the most difficult jobs there is, which is raising the next generation, particularly in relation to our children's emotional and behavioural needs. Today's topic was chosen from parents that we support via a consultation that we held, and it was the #1 topic, so hence why we're here today. For the next hour, we're going to be hearing from our speaker, Samantha Abraham, or Sam as we call her. We're also going to have some questions and answers, and some of those questions have actually come in already. But if you have a question yourself, feel free to pop the questions in the chat, and we will attempt to, or Sam will attempt to answer them. For those questions that we don't have time to address today, Sam has said that she will answer all your questions, so look out for the responses. Similarly, if you would like some parent support yourself, then feel free to put your name and telephone number, mobile number in the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we will be in contact with you. It's all confidential. So that just leaves me to introduce Sam. Samantha Abraham is a brilliant parenting practitioner. She's also a coach and a psychotherapist. So I hope that you have pen and paper to the ready, because I'm very confident that Sam's going to be sharing some real golden nuggets today. So with that said, over to you, Sam.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sam. I'm going to get stuck straight in and talk a little bit about emotional resilience. So, give me a moment. So I'm sure most of us will kind of think about life in probably positive and negative ways. But saying that, we're thinking specifically about stress. We kind of look at it as a particular outlook and given where we are in our stress level at the time. So if we're able to kind of manage it, we can look at it in a more positive way. And if we're not so much, we can look at lots of things in a negative way. There's a lot of balance and focus on where our thinking is at the time. Thinking about stress responses, though, it happens in 3 different ways, and it's good to kind of get an awareness of that as we're moving forward. So the thinking or the mental response is the thoughts we have in a stressful situation. And it can, again, be one of the positive or negative. It's either get the feeling like this is something that's coming out to get us, or we kind of get going thinking, actually, do you know what? I've got this. I'm going to manage this. It's going to be fine. And we have that level of confidence about it. And when you're thinking about emotional resilience, is thinking about which one is it they're handling at the moment. Is it more that we're looking at it from the perspective of, I've got this, or it feels like it's something that's out to get us? So in the same way, that has an effect on our bodies physically. We get a feeling or a physical response. The body will react to whichever one of those thoughts we're having. If it feels like it's something that feels like a threat and something's out to get us, we'll see things like our heart racing, we might speak really quickly, we might get stomach churning, you name it. And then equally, if we're having a more calm response and thinking we're going to get it, we get a much more slower heart race and we can kind of manage things and get through. Those 2 things will dictate our behavior. So if we're feeling like something's out to get us, we can do things like freeze or flight. And I'm sure you heard of this kind of saying, the freeze, flight or fight response, where you can either freeze in the situation and feel quite helpless and not know what to do, get kind of blank mind and that sort of thing. Versus if you feel like, you know what, I've got this. You start thinking and feeling like you've got this, and therefore you kind of go into the situation with that level of confidence. But what also happens, and more so as parents, I'm sure all of you will relate to this bit, is that stress comes in various levels. So if we think of it in the first level, it's kind of milder level, is that we get an adrenaline rush. It's kind of short, sharp and fast response. We hear the thing, we see the thing and respond to it very quickly, and our heart starts racing, but it needs to do that. It's our brain's response to getting us ready to deal with the situation. But if you think of it as parents, it's normally something like when you brought your baby home for the first time, and you might have gone and done a few things and the baby's been sleeping and quickly they start crying. We drop everything and run. In that way, stress can be a positive thing. And when we think about how we manage it or how we're thinking about it in exactly the same way we would need to back in the day, as they say, depending on your school of thought and how you think that we evolved as people. But a lot of the kind of thinking around it is when we were cavemen and cave women, we would have needed to run away from dinosaurs and bears and what have you. We needed that response to keep us alert and to get us to run away and get ourselves to safety and grab the children and that sort of thing. So there's a really good reason why we have that. However, if we're constantly in that space, it then becomes level 2. So unlike having a really fast adrenaline response and having a really fast response to it and being alert and ready to go and do something, we just have this maintained level of calm, but we're always thinking about the situation. So it's not like when the baby's just first crying and we're responding. It's that in our minds, we're always waiting for the baby to cry. We're always waiting for the next situation to happen. And we stay at this level of calm in our own thinking, but our body's responding to it in exhaustion. So we're going to get more anxious, we're going to get more tired, and we're going to start seeing ourselves generally thinking, it's okay, I've got this, when actually our body telling us something quite different. At the same time, you might be losing sleep, our eating patterns changing. But all the time, as far as we're concerned, we're kind of busy responding to our children and doing those sorts of things as we normally would, not really noticing that the signs are coming to say that actually we're becoming more stressed than we were before. But last but not least, we've kind of drowned out the idea of an alarm coming or the dinosaur coming to get us. As far as we're concerned and our bodies are concerned, either the baby's just going to be continuously crying and so we stay in that mental state, but all the time, again, we're losing energy. So we're going to constantly be on permanent high alert. We're going to have lesser tolerance. So if you've got several children and you've got a newborn that you're tending to, and then you've got a toddler, and you're just finding yourself becoming more snappy and those sorts of things, it's because of that consistent lack of sleep, lack of energy, not tending to ourselves because we're not able to. But in the moment, we're saying to ourselves messages like, I'm tending to the children, I'm doing the school run and this sort of thing. Not recognizing again that our stress levels are becoming higher and higher and higher. But the other thing to be also be mindful of and aware of too is the signs that we get when they're stressed, because we can understand that there's levels, and we talk about stress levels all the time in this very abstract way, not recognizing how we're actually feeling on the inside or how we're thinking on the inside. And I say that because this applies to both of us as adults and for our children. Some of us, and especially if we're looking at our children, will think of our children as being quite shy or quite anxious. They might cry a lot. They might be lacking confidence and be quite clingy. And normally when we're meeting that as parents, we might meet it with a lot of empathy and sympathy, because it's that kind of thing. It comes in our mind, especially when children are young. We respond to it with lots of empathy. We respond to it with a lot of care and a lot of attention. But if your child is particularly boisterous or is aggressive or argumentative, some people describe this, and you might hear this in kind of school and that sort of place, as being oppositional. So it seems like there's always an argument. Everything you ask your child to do, they're doing the very opposite. We don't meet it with the same level of care, the same level of empathy, because then it becomes frustrating. We feel quite fed up and those sorts of things. So it's just good to kind of keep that in mind, is that in both cases, they're responsive to the child feeling stressed. And in our case too, when we've got lots going on, when we're feeling more argumentative, more irritable, it's not because we don't care. And to keep that in your mind too, because we carry lots of parental guilt and we say things to ourselves like, I shouldn't have been snappy at the child, or all these sorts of things. But actually, we're not recognizing in those moments, those when we need to kind of slow down, go and get yourself that cup of tea or do what you need to look after you, just to be able to kind of slow things down. So as I mentioned, these signs can be, again, for adults and children, but it's also good to just keep in mind how we do that across genders too. Normally, we'll say things like a child is boisterous, which lends more to boy behaviour than being oppositional, being defiant, being argumentative, and having very outward behaviours. And whereas if a boy also becomes more shy and more clingy, how we use our language to respond to it might be things like, boys don't cry and that sort of thing. But while we're saying that is, we're then growing them into men who then don't have the capacity to talk about their emotions, because these are the messages they've gotten. And equally, when we with our girl children and they're crying and we tend to those, but then equally, if they then become more aggressive or again defiant, we become uncomfortable. And this is again where parental stress and parental guilt and those kind of feelings that make us feel uncomfortable come in, is that there's a response that we give based on how we're feeling when our child behaves in these ways. So if you think back to when you yourself were a child and when you were crying or when you were upset, there's just various different ways where your parent has responded to you. And we've learned and carried some of those with us, and in other ways we just don't have tolerance for. And I'm going to speak for myself. I'm a mum of 5. So there's one response I know that gets me very uncomfortable is the idea of any of my children crying, and I quickly respond to it. Versus if they're talking about their emotions or they're becoming, they're kind of what they see as standing up for themselves or making a point, I'm very comfortable with those and I respond to them completely differently. But I know I have low tolerance for crying. So I may say things like, use your words or what have you. All of us have our own version of those things that we do where we become stressed. And it's again, noticing what our own personal responses are to when we're feeling uncomfortable with other people's emotions, because equally, that's the time when we're going to need to rein it in for ourselves. That's the time when we need to pay attention to what is causing us stress. And we'll notice those signs again when we're reacting to situations or reacting to our children or people, but also to understand where that comes from. Because if we can do those 2 things, we can start thinking about how we then change those behaviours and how we change those responses. So as we're experiencing stress or we're having negative thoughts, and again, as I gave you that example of myself, those are based on my past experiences. When I have those, I have negative feelings. I associate in my mind crying with I needed some attention or something to that nature, and I will keep that in my mind. Consciously and subconsciously, I'll keep things in my mind, and we all do that. We'll always kind of, when we're responding with stress or we're finding something uncomfortable or we're feeling discomfort in ourselves, it's based on our past experiences. So we keep the negative thoughts associated with those past experiences in our mind, and in the present, we're feeling something because of that, because the situation we're dealing with now is reminding us of those things. And we're consistently staying in this cycle of doing that. So when we do that, we get the physical symptoms. Again, that might be the heart racing, stomach churning, and what have you. And the easiest thing for us to do in that moment is to push it away, try and avoid it. We don't think about how we're going to manage that emotion or how we're going to manage the feeling, because we're stuck in the feeling itself. We're stuck in those thoughts themselves. And that just continues again in this continuous cycle. So we get the thought, the feeling, the behavior, the symptoms, and they're just continuously going around. The reason why we become stressed, though, also needs some looking at for us. For some of us, we might come from families where there's been lots of stress, lots of tension. Again, people's way of managing, or again, their emotional resilience to situations might have been lower for any myriad of reasons. But it's again good to us to understand in our own thinking, and again, our past experiences, is that part of the reason why? Or is it just our temperament? And for everybody, you've got a different understanding of temperament. So when I'm talking about temperament, what I'm referring to is those bits are you a morning person? Do you get up in the morning and you're kind of ready to go? So you're saying good morning to everybody and opening the lights. You might put the radio and the TV on. And for you, that's just part of your day. And if you've got a child who is not a morning person, who the idea of opening the curtains really quickly is just going to make them really upset, or go under the covers and press snooze, or again, argue, it's understanding where is your temperament balance and where is theirs, and how do you both adjust to each other? Because in those moments of, again, that response, it causes stress. And if you think about starting your morning and you're starting it in a way that is completely opposite to your natural form of temperament, you're setting yourself off for a day that's going to be full of stress anyway, because at that moment, you're just setting off alarms in the body that are going to cause them to be on high alert. And that will stay for a long period throughout the day. You're going to be waiting for another thing and another thing and another thing to get you into that space of being needing to be up here, needing to be responding, and probably responding in a negative way too. For other people, again, it might be stressful or traumatic events. So there's various different ways and reasons why we become stressed. And again, having awareness of where these things come from makes you better armed to know to do something about it. So again, we have influences and influencers. We have environmental or previous situations that cause us stress. And that for us might have been our own school experiences, it might be work, it might be relationships. All those various other things enable us to continue to feel stress. If you're in a relationship where there's lots of arguing, if you're going to work, college, university, wherever, and there's lots of tension, it just keeps this kind of regular stress level going on throughout the time. And so again, knowing where the stress is coming from, knowing what's causing it, and understanding how we are responding to it, how we're feeling about it, how we're thinking about it even, is all the tools that we need to kind of gather and have in our own mind and our toolkit, if you like, so we can do something to address it. So what is emotional resilience and why do we need it? So we just talked in, or I just talked rather, a lot about stress and how the various different stress levels happen. But if you think of it as that's kind of one side, on the other side, resilience is our response to stress. So how do we actually manage the stress? How do we cope with it? How do we make it bigger or smaller? So that's our kind of built-in response to having life challenges and how we look at those in either a positive way, a negative way. But when we look at it more in a positive way and give ourselves positive messages or positive ideas, and when I say that, it could be those smaller things. I've got this, it's going to be okay. We're getting ourselves to a place of calm. We can start getting more confident. And through those two things, we have more control over a situation. We have more control over our thoughts and our feelings with it. And we can recognize the signs kind of day to day as when we're feeling more emotionally resilient, because we're more able to be empathetic and socially skilled. Those are the times when the magic happens, if you like, in our families and in other places, is that we can see other people being stressed or other situations that we'd otherwise find really quite stressful and respond to them with some level of understanding. So we might ask questions and be curious, or we might just show up for that person in a way that's going to help them to bring themselves to a place of calm without ourselves becoming stressed about it. And when we're able to do that, we're able to manage generally to have less stressful situations, not because the situations aren't stressed, our thinking about it and how we're responding to it is much more different. We're giving ourselves that message is going to be okay consistently throughout the whole situation. And when we're less able to do that, and that's normally, again, if you think about your stress level being a 3, so you're consistently feeling exhausted, not sleeping, not really focusing on yourself because you've got all these other things going on. And then on top of that, you've got all these other consistent demands. And children bring those, they bring consistent demands. We then end up over a period feeling quite helpless. And it's natural, just again, a way of avoiding situations to turn to drugs, alcohol. We might make choices that are not great for us as a way to avoiding. So we might end up in relationships that aren't necessarily healthy. But in the time, it's just helping to push down those feelings on the inside. We're not having to deal with them, but we're somehow managing to cope through. The other thing to bear in mind now, and some of us are brilliant at doing that, and we call this masking, is that we may not fall into any of those patterns when we see that we're feeling stressed. We may never turn to drugs, we may never turn to alcohol, we may never get into a bad relationship, but we develop unhealthy relationships with healthy things. We start really overdoing it in things like going to the gym. So rather than going 2 or 3 times a week and doing a few hours at a time, you might find yourself going for 3 hours, 2 hours before work, or at any given moment we get the opportunity to. You might really start controlling the amount of food you eat. There's various different ways, again, the things that you think about as really healthy things to do, just to have some level of control and just to have some level of feeling like you've got this. You're not helpless in every area. The focus then goes somewhere else. And we've probably all got that friend or family member that you see being looking like they've got it really together, when internally they're just avoiding the situation by pushing it further and further inside. And I'm showing you my hands on purpose because I want you to think of your feelings kind of being like this. And the more you kind of squeeze them in and squeeze them in and squeeze them in and avoid them, it stands to reason at some point they're going to come out. Now, for that could look in various different ways. That may well be developing a more serious mental health problem. It may well be spiraling in terms of drugs or alcohol, again, depending on what it is you end up turning to. So if we're thinking about how we avoid doing avoidance itself, think about how you yourself do avoidance. For some people, it's going to be outright avoidance and be very clear that you're avoiding things. And in other cases, it might look more like procrastination. So I'll talk about me again, because I know the ways I'm guilty, right? Some of the ways that I do procrastination is I've got a deadline that I'm really feeling horrible about, or I just don't feel like doing it, or the idea of it just feels too big. And I will suddenly pull the whole house down, start decluttering everything, start cleaning everything, anything to avoid doing that, just prolonging the time before I have to face doing that something. We've all got our different versions of doing something like that. So again, recognizing what your own is, so you can recognize that you're avoiding it. And when we don't do that, avoidance is coming up in various different ways. But when we're doing avoidance in its own way, what happens is our mind becomes cluttered. We stop focusing on the strengths that we have, the abilities that we have, and our mind becomes cluttered with all the ways we can avoid this situation, while at the same time giving all of our control, all of our thinking, all of our energy into that situation. And that's when we start losing sleep, because before we go to sleep, we're still carrying the ideas, the thoughts, the things you must do. And that today, again, looking for parents, is going to look like the school run you've got to do, the project that you're avoiding, the thing you forgot to put in the washer. Now you've got to get up at God knows what hour in the morning to go and get the PE kit to give to the children. And then all the other things you've got to do, to pay the bills and all the other things. It just becomes a consistent clutter of mind of thinking about these things. And then what happens is, and you'll recognize again these signs, it's those days when you've gone out to do the school run and then recognize, oh my goodness, I've left the keys, I forgot to put the cat back in, and all those things that we suddenly start forgetting, or you've put a shoe in the fridge. Random things that just look at the time afterwards funny are just signs that stress is taking over because we're avoiding dealing with this situation. All the time it's doing that, we're chipping away at our own self-belief without even realizing we're doing it, because we're just pushing this thing further and further on the inside. And all the time we're doing that, we're very much stuck in that negative stress cycle of just thinking about the thoughts, feeling more negative, behaving in ways that we don't really agree with or don't want to, but we just feel no control to be able to do anything different. So while we're doing all of that, we get stuck into ideas of this negative thing's going to happen. And we're always then on high alert, not only for responding to the situation that we see stressful, we're on high alert for the stories we're now building up in our mind about what might happen. And we're making those stories bigger and bigger and bigger. So anything then that looks like it might agree with that, become really impulsive and really reactional to those. And our tolerance level becomes lower and lower. What eventually happens though, again, over a period of time is we get fed up with ourselves. We get fed up of feeling that way. And then we decide the deadline's tomorrow, I'm going to do the work and just crack on. Or whatever the situation is, you just decide you're going to make that big decision. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to stop overeating. I'm going to go on a diet. We start just getting sick of feeling the feeling we're feeling. And we go about and say, okay, that's it. And we wake up the next day and off we go, charging in with zero plans. We make no plan about how we're going to go and do it. We just go on and do it with no plan. And then what happens? We get even more so back into that state because we maintain it for a certain amount of time. Something goes wrong, and slowly, if not, you might just say, you know what, I give up, it's too hard. We make excuses, whatever those bits again look like for you, because we've got unique ways of doing that. We just get stuck in, I failed at doing this thing. And we become really impulsive. We start making impulsive decisions like, I'm going to stop drinking, I'm going to stop smoking, I'm going to, having made no plan to do it, then we set ourselves up to fail. So in order for us to build up resilience, in the same way now that we've just gone through looking at what the signs are for us for stress and how we do stress, how we do avoidance, we also need to make a plan for how we do our resilience building. And because we're going to build them, we're going to build them with some building blocks. So first, we're going to look at how we can calmly observe, but also accept our thoughts. Rather than trying to avoid them, how we can comfortably just look at them and observe them. Once we know what they are, we know where they're coming from, they know how they're affecting us, we can start confronting them. Now, lots of people, even saying the word confrontation can feel uncomfortable. But when I'm saying confrontation, what I'm meaning is that you're going to communicate with the issue. And again, you're going to plan to do that in a particular way that feels comfortable. So that by doing that, you're feeling contained and everything feels safe for you to do it, but you're also building up confidence. You're looking for opportunities then how you can move forward with the best possible way, because you have a plan to do it, rather than just charging in gung-ho. And last but not least, communicating, sharing and talking about our feelings is the last thing that we do. And we've had probably since lockdown, loads of conversations are happening in various different ways about the importance of mental health and sharing and talking about our feelings. But as parents, that's not what we just do. We just crack on and keep focusing on the children. We keep focusing on the next thing we've got to get done and not focusing on, actually, how was my day? How was my morning? How did I feel? What was the great things about the day? What are my strengths? We just don't do that as habit. So let's start with the first building block and think about calm. And again, some of you will be doing this already. So take from any of these tips that I'm going to give you what's going to work for you. But creating moments of calm. So not expecting or hoping you're going to get a moment of calm, actively making it part of your day to create those moments. And whether that's waking up at about 5 minutes earlier, just so you can get that cup of coffee or cup of tea and drink it while it's still hot, rather than making it and let it sit on the side while you've packed the lunch and done everything else. And by the time you've got back to it after doing the school run, you remember that you just left it and it's cold now. Rather than doing that, give yourself that time. And I know when you're exhausted or you've not slept well yourself, or you've been up with the child till whatever hour in the morning, the last thing you want to do in the morning is get up earlier than you plan to. But again, if you set off the day in the way that you're in control of, you're in control of the rest of your day. So taking that 5 minutes to just do that bit just for you before everybody else wakes up, gives you the moment to kind of say to yourself, how am I going to go and do today? What is it I have planned today? And again, because you have a plan, you have more control over the situation. But not only that, if you can plan throughout your day to have regular breaks or having a break, the thing where you've been able to attend here, and thank you for doing it, making time for yourself to come take time out to do, if it's 5 minutes, you go for a walk around the building, or it's 5 minutes that you literally have that cup of tea, put your shoes off for 2 minutes, read your favorite book, giving yourself those few minutes of calm can help you to say, do you know what, this morning up until this point, it's been like this, and this is what I'm going to do. I can control this situation for the rest of the day. I'm going to make the decision that this is what I'm going to do with the rest of the afternoon, before the children get home or before you have to do the next thing. Taking time out to actively decide how you're going to spend the rest of the day, how you're going to recognize that actually it's been a stressful morning, and that you just recognize now that you're sat down, that your body's aching because you're tired, because otherwise you'll just continue that same cycle. Your body will continue aching, you'll continue feeling tired, without even recognizing that you're feeling those things, just become your normal. So taking that little bit of time, and then as you become more confident at doing it, it becomes your regular thing to do. Elongate the time. Instead of giving yourself 5 minutes, work up to 10 minutes. Work up from there, and you're comfortable with that. Work up to longer periods. And ideally, you want to get up to a good 45 minutes, an hour, half an hour, if you can get that, to get yourself that earlier up in the day. And then in some point of the day, it doesn't have to be at lunchtime, whenever works for you in your schedule and your other commitments, that you make time to do that for the rest of the day, and focus not only on how you're feeling and what you have done and haven't done, but what it is you want to do, how is it you want to feel, and how you can go about making those steps happen. So notice what your initial thoughts are, and notice what you're thinking and how that's informing your feeling, and then is noticing how that's making you feel or do what you're doing at the time. A little trick that I use with lots of my clients when I'm doing more coaching and therapeutic work is using your power states. So in that first half an hour when we wake up, and the last half an hour before we go to sleep, we're naturally in a hypnotic state. Our brain's normally not quite awake as we're waking up in the morning. We're still kind of gathering. And if we're really stressed parents, what's happening in that first half an hour is that thing's clicking off. The stress level's high, and it's telling us we've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to do this. And more so now this time of year, we're also saying, it's cold, I don't want to get up, you're pressing the snooze button, all the sorts of things you're just doing to avoid, again, having to go and face the day. So if we can start using that half an hour when we're naturally in a state where the brain's not quite awake, is actually in a really good hypnotic state. So whatever we kind of sow the seed of in that moment has greater chance of growing throughout the rest of the day. And if you give yourself a really good message, whether it is I'm going to have a great day, or I'm going to be calmer today, or I've got this, saying that to yourself on the inside in that first half an hour can really make a significant difference. And if again, you take that next break, for the couple of minutes you take it later on in the day, and remind yourself of that, you're starting to unlearn all of the old negative thinking you used to have, and start replacing it with this more positive thinking, which will then give you positive feeling and positive behavior for the rest of the day. And when I say behavior, it's just the things you go about doing. It's not particularly that you're doing anything. It's just thinking about how you want to be. You're putting that in as a seed to let that grow, rather than what is. And if you get stuck into these ruts of running around behind the children and balancing all these other things, it's really easy to let that seed be something negative. So we're going to change some of that. And another quick tip to give to that as well. And again, it's the last thing we do when we're stressed. When we're stressed, again, we're pushing down all these emotions. We can come very, very still. I can see me coming on. And we tend to stop moving around so much, but there's a huge connection between emotion and motion. If you're able to just do so much as a stretch in bed, those bits can again start energizing the body in really soft ways without it feeling like another draining thing that you have to do. So once we kind of practice that and we become more confident at doing those things, we can also start thinking about how we confront. So how we understand and accept the themes we've been having. Quick tip to add into there too is that we cannot, it's impossible for us because our brain doesn't allow us to feel something and think about how we're feeling at the same time. We have to almost stand outside of ourselves to think about what is that feeling I've got. So if you think about being really, really stressed, and then someone asks you, or you're asking yourself those questions I asked right at the beginning, where is that coming from? What is it I'm feeling? What, you know, what is all of those things that you kind of ask yourself and say, do you know what? I just recognize now that I'm sat down, I'm having this tea, or I'll take my shoes off for a minute. I've just recognized I'm actually aware now, my heart's just starting to slow down. I didn't even realize it was pounding. I didn't even realize I had the headache. And now you can just really feel it. We just get stuck in those moments. So really starting to stop to do those bits, start practicing that first bit of creating those calm, allows us to just accept it and say, actually, yeah, it makes sense. Actually, I had that project, or I had that phone call, I had this situation, I've been running around with the children. Making time for that gets us time to kind of say, you know what, I understand it a little better now. So now that we're thinking about it and not feeling it so much, we can start asking ourselves what we want to do about that. Because now we've got all the information and all the clues, if you like, you kind of gathered over watching yourself, because you've had the moment to stop, to think about what was all that going on. We don't often grant ourselves that bit to really check and ask ourselves what had been going on in that first part of the morning. How am I going to focus on the rest of the day? We just don't do that. We just keep plodding on and plodding on. So allowing yourself to do that and then say, okay, if it is argument's sake, it's been running around behind the children and you've forgotten to do something, what's going to make that difference for the rest of the afternoon? Are you going to suddenly do it then, or are you going to make a plan again to go and do something to take control over it? If you're thinking about really kind of delving into what those feelings are, if there has been a particularly long-standing event, or you've been dealing with a child who their behavior has been a real struggle, helping to kind of manage your own thoughts in those moments can really make the difference. So if you think about not only your feelings and your children's, and you can again use these tips for yourself and your children too. So you can help them to ask them what's been happening at school, for argument's sake, because I know we've got lots of questions about children who have got the different struggles at school. So not asking them just what's happened, but asking them how they were feeling, helping them to name the emotion itself, and then asking them where in their body they're feeling it. So if they are feeling like I've got a tightness in their chest, but at the same time they're feeling really scared, they're feeling really anxious, they're feeling really sad. Again, having those conversations about what's happened, where it's happened, what it's made them feel, and where in the body is, give them all the clues that they can do something about it, because we're not going to be there in the classroom to help them to manage them through that. So if you think that they can now recognize that their chest is becoming tight and they're feeling sad, they've then got the language to go and say to somebody, whether it's a teacher or someone else, or come back to you and say, this is what's happened, this is how I felt, this is what I did. As a parent, you can respond to, okay, if it's in the tightness in their chest, how do we help them with that? Do I need to teach them how to breathe in those moments? Do I need to say to them in those moments to take a deep breath? Because if they can control their breathing, they control their thinking and everything that follows afterwards. And it's giving ourselves those tools, because once we master them, we're going to be brilliant at giving those to our children. So as I said right at the beginning about the causes of stress and coming from stressful families, if we as parents are really stressed, we're teaching that to our children, because children, as I'm sure you all know and probably agree, they're fantastic at not listening to the things we ask them to do or that we want for them to do, but they're fantastic at copying us, especially if we slip up and say or do something we shouldn't, and then we see them go and copy it. It's from that same thinking. So teaching them first to kind of check what is going on here with me, how am I thinking about it, how am I feeling about it, where is it in my body? If we can do that, we're going to be fantastic to show that to our children, because now we're putting a language and a behavior and a coping mechanism behind it too. So Another tip you can use with your children, if you've got children who are refusing to go to school because, again, they've got anxiety, or for yourself, if you've got that big project, you can use something called the fear or the stress ladder. And let's say you've got a child who's refusing to go to school. We'll put the idea of them going to school as 100. So that's out of 100, that's where they are with their stress, that's where their fear and their feelings are. That's 100. Then we have to sit down and get them to think about, what does a 90 look like? What does an 80 look like? And go so far down as to get to a 10, and just get them practicing the thing that's at a 10. And when they're comfortable at the 10, we can move them on to the 20. When they're comfortable at the 20, we can move them on to the 30. But all the time, we're giving them those positive messages from the time they wake up in the morning. You can do it, you can do it, you can do it. Because by doing that, we're giving them the hope, we're giving them the opportunity and the control, because they've seen this plan that they've helped to create with you. And again, as parents, you can go to schools and other people that you've got involved in these support networks and stuff that can also kind of build around this plan with you too. So from that same end, you've got this one, the fear ladder itself is aimed at children. There's exactly the same one for the stress ladder for adults. And again, do exactly the same things for yourselves. As I mentioned earlier, it's temperament. So being aware of whether you're a morning person and what the things are that trigger you into stress as a normal day-to-day thing. So I'm not talking about the particular events or the traumas of the past, but as a day-to-day, are you someone who needs to have a plan for your day? Are you someone who needs to have that half an hour in the morning before everybody else wakes up? Or are you okay to get up with everybody else and just manage everything in that moment? Because if you can understand what those bits are, it makes your whole plan for the rest of the day much easier. But equally, if we think about temperature and think in the morning, you're thinking about yourself and saying, actually, I'm not a morning person. What does that mean? Does that mean you need to go and have a coffee and have finished your coffee before you interact with other people? If you are that person who, if you wake up in the morning and someone opens a curtain, reacts really quickly, they're all telling you different clues about your temperament and how you need to manage your day in itself. So, argument's sake, if you're thinking about how you adjust to that, getting up that little bit earlier before everybody else, having your tea or your coffee and having your shower and getting dressed, and then waking up means you've had time to yourself. You might have thought about the rest of the day and how you're going to spend it, or just allowing yourself that bit of what we call self-care, just to do you for that moment before dealing with everyone else. Because that means you're at the lower end of the temperature and what we call colder. You can't manage everybody else and their feelings, because at that moment you just need time to warm into the day. Whereas if you're waking up at the other end of the temperature scale and thinking, actually, you're somebody who's going to be high alert, ready to go, and everyone else in the house manage that. And what does that mean for you? Does that mean that you need to eat regularly because you're using up all this energy? You need to take the time to do something to bring you down a little bit so you can be at the same level as everyone else? Are they really struggling with the fact that you've got the radio on and open the curtains? So it's just, again, thinking not just about ourselves, thinking about the family and how we're affecting the family, but also how we can control situations that we're struggling with in the family by recognizing not only our own temperament, what is everyone else's temperament, and how do we adjust ourselves and each other around each other. And as you keep, again, building these up, you're going to move your I can'ts or feeling like I can't into I cans. So last but not least, what we're fantastic at, and I say we because I'm sure there's going to be a few people who are brilliant, but there's most of us who are not great at talking about the things we're fantastic at. We're not talking about what our strengths are. Instead, we can be able to tell you a million things we've done wrong, a million things we wish we could have changed, a million things that are not fantastic. But at the moment I ask people, especially when I parent the parenting groups, what are your strengths? What are you good at? What are you really proud of about yourself? Everyone has to take a moment to really stop and think, and it takes ages and they struggle to come up with the same long lists. So part of our unlearning is to relearn how we replace those negative thoughts and we start changing how we do that in the first place. So rather than building up that kind of mental and emotional log of all the things that are negative and all the things you wish you could change, if you're looking back at the end of your day or even starting the day with, yesterday was great because today if I've achieved this new thing that I've learned today was this, I start replacing that log with some positives, actually writing them down or saying them to somebody else or sharing with somebody else. Actually, yeah, this is a good part of my day. I start focusing more on those. That does huge amounts. but it also gives another point of conversation. In the same way we ask our children every day when they come home from school or college, how was your day? What did you do? Give yourself that same momentum. Give yourself that same pleasure. Celebrate those elements of yourself that you're doing really well. And it doesn't have to be a big up here thing. It might have just been, I managed to get all of the laundry done today and I don't have to think about it tomorrow. Whatever those things are that make you say, you know what, this made my day easier, made my day better, I feel better today. Start taking a record of those and share them with other people. Because I'm sure, depending on which part of the world you come from, you'll hear a saying that says something very similar to misery likes company. If we're that mum or that dad who's at the school gate talking about, well, I was up and this one's done this and I've forgotten the thing, I've got to go back and get the PE kit and blah, 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 blah. That's the conversation you're having. It just begins, it breathes more. Whereas if you're able to say, actually, today's been a great day, that can spread too. It's all in your control to do that. So having some self-control and deliberately taking breaks, setting the reminders in your phone, all those things to give yourself a bit of self-validation, validate you, validate the parts of you that are fantastic and you have strengths in. And again, the more you're able to do those bits and practice those and become comfortable, the more your child will be able to do the same thing with your children. So they're going to be copying you no matter what you do. So you might as well take control and make them great things that they copy, right? If they can see you feeling great about yourself and waking up in the day, feeling like, actually, I've got this. You're anxious, you're nervous, you're worried child will do exactly the same thing because that's what they know to be their new normal. And as you're practicing it, they can practice it too. And your conversations change because then you're sharing in the things that are becoming brilliant. As you do that though, if you are a parent who is potentially anxious or stressed because you've got so many demands going on and you see your child is in that same place, when you start making these changes, start practicing them and becoming more confident, you're going to do something called co-regulate. So you're going to bring your stress level down and bring theirs down as well, because it takes a parent to help the child to regulate their own emotions. So often when I'm working with parents and they're talking about they really help, they tried everything to really help their child to manage their emotions. Half the time, and I say half because it's not always the case, sometimes it is just, they're just left with nothing left. They just have to expel all this energy from what they've been dealing with at school. For a child who is particularly stressed, really not coping, and is really anxious and frustrated, often what you'll see with them is that during the school day, because they've got a platform where it is rigorous and there's routines and there's structure and they know from one moment to the next what's going to happen, from the moment you pick them up to the time you get home, it's just, you just watch their temperature or their temperament become higher and higher. It's from that whole time of, again, they've been doing their version of avoidance. They've been pushing down and pushing down and pushing down these fears, these stresses, these worries. And now that you're the safe space that they can feel safe to do that in, all of that comes back out and that's what you're dealing with. And then it becomes frustrating to you because you're really struggling to manage what those are. So again, being able to kind of recognize what your signs are, where your tolerance levels are and how you can bring yourself to a space of calm and deal with them calmly is going to be the very thing that allows them to be able to name what's been happening, name where they're feeling it, name what the thoughts are, and allow you both to bring this calm down and start communicating with the issue and how you can fix it. So as I've written on here, it's important. I want you to be your own cheerleaders. I want you to support yourself by finding a kind of group network of other cheerleaders, and also be the cheerleader within your family for your children too. Once you kind of, again, practice all of those, and by the time you've practiced all of these and you've kind of worked up to all these different stages, I have no doubt in my mind, by then you'll be fully fledged emotionally resilient. And that's what happens with regular practice. And I say practice because I want you to create the plan and to practice it. So after this, you'll be all sent out via email a workbook that's going to go through all the stuff I've covered here today. And you can create your own personal plan for yourself and for your family. And when you've done that, you'll have a much stronger, calmer foundation from a place of calm to start doing you and your family. Be more able to manage stressful situations and coach yourself and others to manage stress and build the skills for co-regulation. So just to summarize, we covered some of life challenges, what stress is and how it affects us, what emotional resilience is, and last but not least, what you can do. So all of the tips I've covered today, and then some are in the book, and we'll get those sent out to you. So I'm going to hand back over to me, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, Sam. I don't know if any of you realized that I actually disappeared for a period of time. So I had my own stress to deal with a temperamental internet connection. And I had to self-talk and say, it is well, I'll get back on, it'll be fine. So thank you, Sam. So I was doing some of that self-talk. You couldn't have made it up, to be honest. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to ask Sarah to come into the room and just take us through a few of the questions that have come in. Sarah?
Hello, hi everybody. Okay, so we had quite a few questions come in today, which was great. This is one of the first ones. How do I help my child be resilient to an authoritarian style of teaching? And to give a bit of context, we've been told that, for example, to a raised voice or a strong tone being used, and being told off as part of a group where they personally didn't do anything. The parent says, I feel this knocks their confidence when you're a sensitive child. And so far, I've tried using the imagery of armor or a bubble around my child and then let the sound and words bounce off it. It works a bit, but when it's continuous and more than just a one-off, it's very hard for the child.
First off, I commend the parent who's written in, because I'd imagine that's been a hard situation to deal with in the first place. And as parents, the first thing you want to do is protect our children, right? So it sounds like, by all means, just even thinking about the techniques already you've been using, that you've been fantastic. I would absolutely say, in the first instance, rather than focusing first on the child and their feelings, to have a conversation with the teacher and make them aware of what's going on for your child. There's probably other parents whose children are feeling similar who haven't had the voice, so it might be a conversation there to be had. I think with shouting, it's one of those things. Generally, if anyone's shouting, we can imagine in the teacher situation when you've got 30 children who are loud, shouting as a result of not feeling heard. So this probably sounds like a teacher who's struggling to keep the class in check anyway. And so there might be, again, a conversation worth having with the teacher and the school at wide about how they manage when children aren't and what their behavioural policies and stuff are. But in terms of kind of day-to-day for you and your child, it's literally those very things that I was talking about inside this webinar, is helping them to understand exactly and really name and give them the opportunity to name more than one word. So don't just say, I feel bad when this happens, or I feel sad when this happens, or I feel scared. Really get them to name all of the various different emotions and recognize where it's happening in their body, because then we can start thinking about, is it a visual technique going to be the thing that works or not? It might be literally, can you just take a deep breath? And the thing is, because we're not there, making it as simple a technique as is possible is going to be a significant difference too. If you imagine being a child and someone much bigger than you, or even an adult even, we can get scared if someone's shouting and screaming at us. So for a little child in a classroom setting, especially, again, this has been something that's been poured on several times by sound of it. They've already got that thought in their mind. They've already got that feeling in their mind. They're stuck in that cycle I talked about. So we need to break the cycle with, what can you just do in that moment? What's the easiest thing you can do? And that's when I talked about like the fear ladder. So if you think the teacher's shouting and screaming as has called them names or what have you as being 100, what does 90 look like? And get them all the way down to the 10 and start asking them the questions of, when you're at 10, what can you do then? So you're giving them loads of control and giving them lots of resources in their own right, so they feel like they can do that, whatever that one thing is. It might be several things even they can do at a 10, and just keep them practicing that and then working them up to the 20. But in the background of which, and I can't stress that enough, have the conversation with the school. Okay.
Brilliant, thanks, Sam. I know we've got another, yep, here we are. Do you have any tips for children with autism and helping them deal with
I'm
stress?
slightly biased, so I'm going to say there's a course that Brilliant Parents run called Stepping Stones. If you haven't done that already, definitely recommend either attending that or one of the discussion groups for children who've got autism. Autism is a broad thing, it's a spectrum. So I wouldn't like to say try this one particular technique or try not another one. In the handbook, which you'll get, there's several different ones. Depending on where your child is on the spectrum, again, I would say use the FAIR ladder. But there's a whole different range of stuff in there that you'll find probably quite useful. Okay.
Okay, I recognise some of these stress reactions in my 6-year-old. How would you talk to a child this age to help them become more resilient? I'm worried that her stress is often in response to mine.
So very much like I said then in your case, is to recognize for yourself that what is it you're responding to? Is there things in your past history that's causing you're having this regular kind of thought? Because often what happens is there's a conversation that we're having in our head first, and then the thoughts kind of go from there, but then there's a particular way that you're responding to it. So are you noticing that you're speaking really fast to your child, or that you're not able to cope with them in those moments? Recognizing what those signs are for you first, and then working backwards from them to get a handle on them for yourself. And then you can start coaching your child to do exactly the same thing. So you can start asking more about when this happens, how are you feeling? What's happening on the inside? What are you thinking in those moments? And just giving a pause to just say, when that happened, what were you thinking? What was going on in your head? And then ask them what was going on in their body. So if they can help them again, name the emotion that they had because of the thought. And then when you're getting that, and I'm going to just say sad for argument's sake, when you're feeling sad, where do you feel it? Is it in your head, or is it in your chest? It's normally head, chest, or stomach. So if you need to prompt them, you can go with those places. And again, depending on where it is, you might want to use a visual exercise. You might want to try a breathing one. And again, just kind of manage expectations as well. When you're teaching a child to do these things, in any one of them, do keep in mind that you might have to try doing a couple of times of the visual before that sticks, or trying to do a couple of the breathing techniques before that sticks and really works, because again, we're not going to be there every time they're stressed. So if it's at home, you might say, okay, let's stop for a minute and do the breathing thing together with them, but then say to them, okay, you've nailed this now. And again, keep giving them the message that you've got this, so that when they're in another stressful situation, they can do that again with them, because now you practice it with them, it becomes more, they feel more confident to do it.
Thanks, Sam. I think we've got time for one more. So reluctant learner, how do I get them to do their homework? It's a constant battle that drains us both before we even start. I know a lot of people are going to be nodding to that one.
Yeah, I'm nodding myself. I love that question though, and it's not going to be what mum wants to hear or dad wants to hear, but I'm going to say it for the sake of the child, because they're going to love it and you're going to thank me later, right? First and foremost, don't focus on the piece of homework that they've been asked to do, or the task they've been asked to do. And this is where the creativity on your part's going to really come in. For argument's sake, it's a math piece of homework and they've been asked to do a worksheet or something with numbers and dividing and what have you. Use the things they naturally like playing with, whether it's Lego or what have you, to do exactly the same exercise. Argument's sake, if they're asking what the 5 + 5 is, or doing that kind of maths question, use the thing they're playing with, whether it's Lego or not, whatever task or thing they're playing with in the moment, and ask them the questions while they're doing that, because then they're doing homework without recognizing it. Once you get them again used to you being interacting with them in that particular way, you can bring the math sheet alongside and say, okay, we're going to use that to do this, and then it stops them from refusing. And equally, if it's another subject, I'm just using maths as an example, using different mechanisms that, you know, there's things that your child naturally enjoys, bringing the homework to that rather than the other way around.
Great. So I'm going to take us over to the poll now. I think just to say that any questions we haven't answered, they will all be answered. We have got a lot in the chat, and Sam has said that she'll be able to give a video response to them later. But if you could all just take a minute to complete this poll, that would be great. Any further questions, stick them in the chat, they will be answered. And also, if you've got any further comments with regards to the webinar, the information you've heard today, information you might like to hear in the future, please pop that in the chat as well. So I think what we can say, brilliant, we've had a really good response. Thanks so much to everybody that's attended. Everybody seems to have found some benefit from today. We've got 100% of you have said you found it good and above, with almost 50% of you saying excellent, which is brilliant. And what else can we see here? So 89% of you feel that the topic covered will positively inform your future self-care, which is wonderful. And 97% of you would like to see another Lunch and Learn webinar. So we look forward to bringing that to you very, very soon. I'm going to hand back to Maeve so that she can close the day. Thanks, everyone.
Well, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Sam, for your contribution. I certainly got a lot of nuggets out of that. I was particularly interested in your comments about how we respond to our boys, sometimes slightly differently to our girls. And also the fact that, you know, everything starts in the mind. Everything starts with the way that we think and our perception of what actually is happening out there. So I think if there was one thing I was going to take away or would take away, that would be it. Thank you all so much for coming along today and spending your lunch break with us. I hope you found it as beneficial. We will be uploading this recording to our website. We will be responding to all the questions that you've asked via video recording from Sam. And we will be sending out a workbook, which is a practical workbook that you can use to strengthen your resilient muscle, as it were. And lastly, if you do want some parent support, please do get in touch with us. Please do put something in the chat or go to our website, brilliantparents.org. Thank you again, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.